The quiet barista greeted the tech mogul's deaf mother inside a small Seattle cafe. But what she signed next left everyone frozen in silence. Subscribe now, or this may be our last moment together. Follow, comment, and share to keep faith in every story. Don't look away. Let's step into the light beneath Arden Tower. It was a gray morning in Seattle, the kind of morning when the clouds hung low enough to brush the tops of buildings and drizzle turned the streets into ribbons of silver. The city pulsed softly under the rain. Cars moved like tired beetles through the mist, and the lake shimmered with the dull reflection of Arden Tower, a colossal building of glass and steel that seemed to cut through the clouds. Beneath that tower sat the Harbor Café, a quiet refuge for office workers, programmers, and the few souls who still believed a cup of coffee could warm something more than their hands. Behind the counter stood Claire Bennett, 28, pale-skinned with a dusting of freckles across her nose and cheeks, her hair a soft chestnut brown that fell loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes were an oceanic blue-gray, eyes that once burned with ambition but now carried the calm of someone who had learned to expect very little. She moved quietly, efficiently, like someone afraid of taking up too much space. Once she had been a data scientist, a name on conference slides, a rising star in the world of artificial intelligence. But betrayal has a way of erasing people more thoroughly than failure. Now Claire hid behind the espresso machine, her world reduced to cups, smiles, and the smell of roasted beans. Next to her worked Maya Patel, 27, her opposite in every way, a lively woman with caramel skin, short curly hair, and laughter that filled the room like sunlight after a storm. Maya had been born in Chicago, raised by parents who owned a flower shop, and she carried that same energy of growth and resilience in everything she did. Her kindness was loud, her teasing constant. Where Claire avoided the world, Maya embraced it fully. "You need to look people in the eye, babe," she would often say. "Otherwise, they'll think you're a secret agent or something." The morning rush came and went in the usual rhythm until the door opened with a soft chime and a woman stepped in, wrapped in a long beige coat. She was in her early 60s, elegant in an understated way, with silver hair pinned neatly in a bun and delicate pearl earrings that caught the gray light. Her name was Helen Ward. Her eyes, a pale, translucent blue, moved attentively around the room but didn't seem to follow sound. They searched for faces, lips, gestures. She carried herself with dignity but also a quiet loneliness, like someone who had learned to live behind glass. Helen had lost her hearing years ago in a car accident that also took her husband's life, and since then, silence had been both her cage and her sanctuary. Claire noticed the hearing aid tucked discreetly behind Helen's ear and the way her fingers trembled slightly as she ordered. The cafe was noisy, the hiss of steam, clatter of cups, people shouting orders. Helen's brow furrowed, lost in the chaos. Claire wiped her hands on her apron and walked around the counter. She crouched, slightly to meet Helen's gaze, and then, slowly, gracefully, she began to sign. "Good morning. Would you like something warm?" Helen froze, her lips parting in disbelief. Then, with the uncertain joy of someone waking from a long sleep, she replied in sign, "You know ASL?" Claire smiled, the first real smile she had shown anyone all week. "A little," she signed back. "Coffee with milk?" Maya, watching from behind the counter, mouthed to another barista, "She's signing. Holy crap, she's actually signing." The noise of the cafe seemed to fade as people turned to look. The sight was simple, yet strangely powerful. Two women, one young and one old, communicating in silence amid the city's endless hum. Helen's eyes glistened. She nodded, and as Claire placed the steaming cup before her, she reached out and lightly touched Claire's wrist. A wordless thank you. At the corner table, unnoticed by most, sat Ethan Ward, Helen's son and the CEO of Ward Tech, a man of 35, with the kind of presence that filled a room even when he wasn't trying. He wore a dark gray suit, the kind tailored to fit not just a body, but an identity. His hair was neatly trimmed, his jawline sharp, his expression precise and controlled. Ethan had built his company from the ground up, a man respected, feared, but rarely understood. Those who worked for him called him brilliant. Those who knew him better called him distant. Losing his father young and watching his mother's world go silent had taught him early that emotions were unreliable currency. He believed in structure, efficiency, and logic until he saw Claire. He watched as she communicated with his mother without words, her hands moving like notes of music, her expression soft and sincere. For the first time in months, he saw Helen laugh, silently, but with her whole face. And in that laughter, something inside Ethan shifted, a small crack in his carefully built armor. He didn't know who this woman was, but he wanted to. When the conversation ended, Helen finished her drink and rose to leave. She turned to Claire, touching her heart, and then gesturing thank you in sign language, a movement so graceful it seemed almost like a bow. Claire nodded back, her lips forming the words, "You're welcome." As Helen stepped out into the rain, the cafe returned to its noise and chatter, but something unseen lingered in the air. Maya leaned across the counter, smirking. "Okay, I have to say it. That was beautiful. You just made the old lady's day." Claire chuckled softly. "Her name's Helen, and she's not old, just calm." "Calm? She's classy as hell," Maya said, winking. "Also, did you notice the guy watching you from the corner? The one in the perfect suit? I swear he looked like he was about to hire you, or marry you, not sure which." Claire glanced toward the table, but it was empty now. Probably just a regular customer. Maya tilted her head. "Yeah, a regular customer with a car that costs more than our rent combined." She sighed dramatically. "If that's what rich people look like when they're impressed, maybe I should start learning sign language too." Claire smiled faintly, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had seen that man just for a moment, and something in his gaze had unsettled her. It wasn't admiration, not exactly. It was recognition, as if he had looked past the apron, past the smile, straight into the part of her she was trying hardest to hide. Later that afternoon, as the rain thickened and the cafe quieted, Helen sat in the back seat of a sleek black car. Ethan drove in silence, his hand steady on the wheel. The city lights streaked across the wet windshield like fading memories. Helen touched his arm lightly and began to sign. "That girl today, the one in the cafe. She reminded me of you." Ethan glanced at her. "How so?" He signed back, his movement slower but fluent. "She has the eyes of someone who lost something she didn't deserve to lose." He didn't respond. But that night, in his office on the 45th floor, while reviewing contracts and reports, her words returned to him again and again. He found himself opening the cafe's website, scrolling through the staff photos until he saw her. Claire Bennett. There was a contact form. Without quite knowing why, Ethan typed a brief message. "Thank you for being kind to my mother today. You made her smile for the first time in a long while. E.W." He hesitated before pressing send. The cursor blinked at him like a heartbeat. Then he clicked. Across the city, in a small studio apartment overlooking the rain-slicked rooftops, Claire's phone buzzed. She read the message, her thumb hovering over the delete icon. She almost erased it. She had promised herself never to respond to anything that might lead her back into the world she left behind. But something about the message, the quiet gratitude in its simplicity, made her pause. She typed, then deleted, typed again. Finally, she sent a single line. "I'm glad she smiled." She locked the phone and sat by the window, watching the rain blur the lights of Arden Tower in the distance. Somewhere behind that glass, A man she didn't know was thinking about her. And though she didn't realize it yet, that small message, just 7 words, would change everything. The morning sky over Seattle was heavy with mist, as though the city itself were holding its breath. From the 45th floor of Ward Tech Tower, the rain made soft trails down the glass, blurring the skyline into shades of gray and silver. Inside, the world looked precise. Sterile hallways, controlled temperature, a hum of machines and muted voices. Ethan Ward moved through it like a man built for symmetry, his dark suit immaculate, his movements measured. But this morning, something uncharacteristically restless stirred beneath his composure. He kept thinking about the woman from the café, Claire Bennett, and the way her hands had moved when she spoke to his mother. Against his usual discipline, he had written to her again, inviting her to Ward Tech, not a personal invitation. He disguised it as a professional proposal. "We are considering accessibility programs for our employees," the email said. "Your ability to communicate through ASL could provide insight." It was formal, neutral, the kind of email that could mean nothing. And yet, as he hit send, Ethan found himself hoping it might mean something more. Claire received the message 2 days later. She almost didn't open it. Since that first brief exchange, she had promised herself to keep distance. But curiosity, the one thing she had tried hardest to kill, flickered back to life. That evening, she stood in front of the mirror, uncertain what to wear for a meeting she didn't understand. She settled on a navy dress, simple but dignified, tied at the waist with a thin belt. The reflection that stared back at her was both familiar and foreign, the same woman who used to present at conferences, but now with eyes that had seen too much silence. At Ward Tech, the receptionist greeted her with corporate politeness and led her through glass corridors lined with digital art. Everything gleamed with the quiet arrogance of success. When she entered the conference room, Ethan stood by the window, city lights casting reflections across his face. He turned when she entered. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice calm but softer than she expected. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Mr. Ward," she replied, setting her bag down carefully. He gestured for her to sit. "I've been thinking about what happened with my mother. It made me realize how much we underestimate communication barriers in workplaces. I thought perhaps you could help us design something, training perhaps." Claire blinked, uncertain. "You mean sign language workshops?" "Yes," Ethan said, "or anything you think might bridge that kind of silence." He paused, watching her. "You seem to understand it better than most." Her lips curved faintly. "Silence?" "Loss," he said simply. The word hit her like an echo through a long hallway. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She looked at him properly then, really looked. Beneath the polished exterior, Ethan Ward carried something she recognized, restraint shaped by grief. They spoke for nearly an hour about language, empathy, data, and design. As they talked, Ethan discovered she was more than a barista who knew ASL. When she spoke about communication models and neural mapping, her vocabulary betrayed her background. "You studied this," he said, narrowing his gaze. Claire hesitated. "I did, at Stanford, computational linguistics and data learning systems." "Then why are you serving coffee?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Claire looked away, fingers tightening around her pen. "Because some systems crash," she murmured. Ethan opened his mouth to ask more, but the door swung open. A woman stepped in, carrying a tablet. Marissa Cole, Ward Tech's operations manager. She was in her early 40s, tall and sharp-featured, with sleek blonde hair and a voice that never rose above necessity. Efficiency clung to her like perfume. "Mr. Ward," she said briskly, "the legal team needs your signature on the NeuroSync partnership brief. They're waiting in conference room B." At the sound of that name, NeuroSync, Claire froze. The air seemed to thin. Her pulse hammered as the words replayed in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Ethan glanced at her, unaware of the storm behind her stillness. "Right? The merger proposal?" he said absently. "We're finalizing integration with Lucas Graves, their CEO. He's—" The rest of his sentence drowned in the sharp clatter of porcelain. Claire's coffee cup had slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor, the sound slicing through the sterile quiet. "I'm sorry," she whispered, kneeling to pick up the pieces, though her hands trembled. Maya's voice from months ago flashed in her mind. "You can't run forever, Claire." Ethan crouched beside her. "It's fine," he said softly. "You're bleeding?" But Claire barely heard him. Her breath came in short bursts. "Did you say Lucas Graves?" Ethan frowned, sensing a shift he didn't understand. "Yes. Do you know him?" Her laugh came brittle, almost a sob. "I used to." She rose abruptly, pressing a tissue to her palm. "I think I should go." "Ms. Bennett? Claire, wait," Ethan called, but she was already out the door, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Outside, the rain had begun again, soft at first, then fierce. She walked without direction, the city dissolving around her. Lucas Graves. The name alone was enough to rip open everything she had buried. The betrayal, the humiliation, the way he'd taken her research, her career, her trust, and left her to drown under false accusations. Meanwhile, back at the Harbor Café, Maya was closing up for the night. The rain had trapped the city in its familiar gray lull, and she hummed softly as she wiped the counter. When Claire didn't answer her texts all day, worry began to stir. Then she noticed something odd, a small stack of envelopes near the espresso grinder. Old, yellowed, all addressed to Claire Bennett, postmarked from Palo Alto, California. None had been opened. The handwriting was the same, careful and almost clinical. Maya picked one up, curiosity pricking at her. But she stopped herself. Claire's past was a locked door, and Maya had learned not to knock too hard. That night, though, when Maya walked home under her umbrella, she saw something that made her uneasy. Across the street, near the alley, a man stood watching the cafe. A man she didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a long, dark coat, his face half hidden by the rain. When Maya's gaze met his, he turned away and disappeared into the mist. She dismissed it as paranoia, until later when she found the same man's reflection in the glass door of her apartment building. Hours later, Claire returned to her small studio, drenched and shaking. She threw her wet coat over the chair and pulled out the drawer beneath her bed. Inside were dozens of old letters, the same kind Maya had found. She took one, hesitated, then tossed it into the sink. She struck a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges black. As she watched it burn, the scent of smoke filled the room. Those letters were from Lucas. Apologies, manipulations, promises. Every one of them a reminder of the man who had stolen her voice and worn it as his own. She watched until the ashes turned gray, and for the first time in years she felt a thin, dangerous kind of calm. But outside, in the parking lot below, headlights flashed briefly before going dark. A man sat in a black sedan, camera in hand, the lens glinting faintly. He raised it, focused, and captured an image through Claire's window. Her face lit by firelight, her eyes like broken glass. The man lowered the camera, checked the photo, and sent it with a single message. Found her. In the distance, lightning flickered over the water, illuminating the WardTech tower. Claire stood by her window, unaware of the gaze watching her from below. Rain streaked the glass, and she pressed her forehead against it, whispering, "Not again." Then she looked up at the towering lights of the skyscraper that now tied her to her past. The reflection of the city glowed in her eyes, a storm brewing between what was lost and what was coming. 3 weeks had passed since the storm that shattered Claire's calm. Seattle's rain hadn't let up, But inside WardTech, the temperature had dropped for a different reason. Ethan Ward had quietly frozen the merger deal with Neurosync under the guise of technical audit delays. The board had grumbled, the investors had pressed, but he'd brushed them off with a simple explanation: due diligence. What they didn't know was that behind closed doors, Ethan was waging a private war against shadows. WardTech's research lab occupied the top floors of Arden Tower, a space filled with hums, flickers, and the quiet heartbeat of machines. Late at night, only a handful of lights stayed on, one over Ethan's office and another in the secure data room down the hall. Claire Bennett stood there, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied in a loose knot, the soft glow of a terminal screen reflecting in her eyes. It was the first time in 2 years she had touched real code again. Ethan had invited her back in secrecy. Officially, he had said, "You're an external consultant reviewing system integrity." The way he said it, measured, precise, almost hid the fact that it was his way of saying, "I believe you." Claire sat before the console, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, hesitant at first, like someone about to touch an old scar. Ethan leaned beside the desk, his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. His calmness was deceptive. There was tension in his jaw, and his watchful silence told her how serious this was. "Everything Neurosync submitted during the partnership review came through our archive," Ethan explained. 17 patents filed in 6 months, all with overlapping data signatures. It's odd. Claire's lips parted slightly. He never could write efficient code. He had to copy structure from someone who could. Ethan raised a brow. "Someone like you." Claire didn't answer. She typed a command sequence, and lines of encrypted text filled the screen. Most of the files had been altered, timestamps adjusted, metadata scrubbed clean. But data, like memory, always left ghosts. As they worked, the hum of the servers became almost like background music. Hours blurred together. Midnight, 1, 2. Claire's hand brushed Ethan's as they both reached for the mouse at once, and she froze, startled by how close they were. He looked at her, not with pity, but something steadier, respect, maybe even admiration. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can find another way." "No," she whispered. "He stole from me. He buried me. I'm done being quiet." Her voice trembled, but her fingers didn't. Across town, under the same rain, Maya Patel was finishing her shift at the Harbor Café when the doorbell jingled. It was nearly midnight. A man stood there holding a paper bag soaked from the rain. He looked to be in his early 30s, tall, lanky, with messy dark hair and the awkward posture of someone who spent too much time in front of screens. "Sorry, we're closed," Maya said, wiping the counter. The man smiled shyly. "I know. I wasn't here for coffee." He hesitated, pushing his wet hair back. "You're Maya, right? You work with Claire Bennett?" Her guard went up instantly. "Who's asking?" "Ryan Cole," he said quickly, pulling out his employee badge. "WardTech Engineer, Cybersecurity Division." "I'm a friend of Ethan's, or, well, an underpaid one." Maya crossed her arms. "And what do you want with Claire?" Ryan hesitated before lowering his voice. "You should tell her not to come into the office tomorrow. Lucas Graves had one of our data analysts pulled off the project. He's asking questions about an unauthorized consultant. He knows someone's looking into his files." Maya frowned. Ryan's eyes darted nervously around the cafe, the look of someone used to being followed by problems. "You're serious?" He nodded and set the paper bag on the counter. Inside was a small black USB drive wrapped in a napkin. "This is a copy of the log archive before Lucas ordered them deleted. Every access timestamp, every developer ID. You'll see one that doesn't belong. Claire Bennett, Dev." Maya's throat tightened. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I believe people deserve to get their names back," he said simply. Then he gave a small, awkward smile, one that didn't quite reach his tired gray eyes. Besides, Lucas fired my mentor last year for asking too many questions. Guess I inherited the habit. Maya studied him a moment longer, then slipped the USB into her apron pocket. Thanks, hero. Try not to get caught. I'll add that to my to-do list, Ryan said dryly, before disappearing into the rain. Back in WardTech, the silence was broken by a faint chime. The system had found a partial data fragment. Claire leaned closer. It's the first line of a commit message, she murmured. Initial framework integration, C. Bennett and Jadiv Ju Chu's core seed model. Her breath caught. The line was old, dated 3 years back, and buried under layers of overwrites. Ethan stared at it, disbelief shadowing his calm. That's your signature, he said quietly. Claire nodded, tears welling at the edges of her eyes. He didn't even bother changing the variable tag. Arrogant, Ethan muttered. He thought no one would ever check. They continued searching, piecing together fragments like archaeologists of the digital world. Eventually, the logs began forming a clearer picture. A stolen algorithm, timestamps coinciding with Claire's firing, file transfers to NeuroSync servers. Ethan cross-referenced each piece with WardTech's internal archive, building a map of deceit. By 3 a.m, exhaustion hung over them like fog. Claire rubbed her eyes, and Ethan placed a cup of tea beside her. No coffee, he said. You're shaking. She smiled faintly. Old habits. As she reached for the cup, her sleeve slipped, revealing a small scar on her wrist. Thin, pale, the kind only those who fought invisible battles carry. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he turned back to the screen. There's one more directory. Hidden partition, double encrypted. If we break through it, we might get your full development log. Claire typed faster now, determination overtaking fatigue. When the final firewall fell, a video file appeared, mislabeled as archdemo.move. Ethan clicked it open. On the screen, a younger Claire stood in a small lab, hair tied back, explaining her AI model to a recording device. Her voice was confident, animated, filled with the kind of light that comes only from belief. In the background, the same algorithm they'd been reconstructing ran on a prototype interface. Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. He took this, she whispered. This was my proof, and he buried it. Ethan watched her silently. The flickering blue light of the screen painted both their faces, her pain, his quiet fury. For the first time, his control cracked. We're going to make sure everyone sees this, he said, his tone steel. Claire shook her head. You don't understand. If Lucas finds out we have this... He already suspects, Ethan interrupted, which means we don't have much time. As if summoned by her fear, a small notification blinked in the corner of the screen. Unauthorized access detected. External IP. Ethan cursed under his breath and disconnected the drive. Someone, somewhere, was watching. He turned to Claire. Take this video and go home. Keep it off any network. I'll handle the trace. Claire hesitated. Ethan, please, he said, and for the first time there was something fragile in his voice. Let me protect what's left of this truth. She nodded, clutching the USB drive like it was a lifeline. When she left the building, the rain had started again, soft but insistent, falling like whispers on glass. Inside the parking garage, a black sedan idled. The driver, the same man from the previous night, watched her through the windshield. He lifted his phone, made a call, and said simply, "She has it." The rain intensified, swallowing his words into the night. The morning sun over Seattle was sharp and cold, slicing through the mist like glass. For the first time in weeks, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining as if they'd been polished clean for something monumental. From the top floors of Arden Tower, WordTech's glass walls gleamed like a cathedral of reason and ambition. Inside, a press conference had been hastily arranged, officially to announce a strategic partnership review between WordTech and NeuroSync. Unofficially, everyone sensed a storm was coming. The conference hall was vast and modern, lined with blue LED panels and the subtle hum of high-end technology. Reporters murmured among themselves, cameras poised, lenses glinting under the lights. Employees from both corporations filled the seats, engineers, managers, investors, faces marked by curiosity, anxiety, or both. At the center stood Ethan Ward, tall and composed in a charcoal gray suit, a calm force amid tension. But those who knew him could sense the quiet rage simmering beneath the surface. He wasn't alone. To his right, seated quietly, was Claire Bennett, transformed from the shy barista who once hid behind an apron. Her hair, once loosely tied, now fell in smooth waves down her shoulders. She wore a black dress, simple but commanding, her posture straight, eyes steady. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and come out tempered, not burned. When she entered the hall earlier, the noise had dropped to a murmur. Some recognized her name from the leaked Bennett log circulating internally, an anonymous data file that had caused ripples across the tech world in the past 48 hours. Others simply felt the gravity around her. And then there was Lucas Graves, the CEO of NeuroSync, always impeccably groomed, always confident. His tailored navy suit gleamed under the lights, and his smile, the one he used to disarm investors and journalists alike, was firmly in place. But when his gaze landed on Claire, the smile faltered. For a heartbeat, his face went pale, then reset into cold composure. "Good morning," Ethan began, his voice even but firm. "Thank you all for joining us. Today's meeting was meant to celebrate the merger between WordTech and NeuroSync, but before finalizing any agreement, due diligence requires clarity. And clarity," he glanced at Lucas, "is what we intend to restore." A ripple went through the crowd. Lucas's jaw tightened. "Ethan, if this is about those baseless—" "I'll let the evidence speak," Ethan interrupted. He turned toward the screen behind him, where a series of technical graphs appeared, metadata records, patent timelines, file structure comparisons. His tone remained professional, but every word landed like a strike. 17 patents, all filed under NeuroSync within 6 months, show identical architecture to a prototype created at Stanford 2 years earlier, under a developer tag. Claire Bennett Dev. Every checksum, every neural map aligns perfectly. Murmurs erupted. Ethan continued, flipping through slides that revealed document forgeries, timestamp anomalies, and audit logs, evidence that Lucas had stolen Claire's algorithm and built his empire upon it. Lucas's smile returned, though tighter now. "Coincidence," he said smoothly. "Similar ideas occur across the industry. Algorithms overlap. This proves nothing about ownership." Ethan nodded once, as if expecting it. "Which is why we've brought in someone who can explain it better than any lawyer." He stepped aside. The spotlight shifted to Claire. For a moment she froze, not out of fear, but the surreal weight of standing before the man who had destroyed her life. Lucas leaned back, arms crossed, a predator's smile creeping across his face. "I see we're recycling ghosts now," he said quietly, but loud enough for the front row to hear. Claire met his gaze and walked to the podium. Her hands trembled only slightly as she began. "My name is Claire Bennett," she said. 2 years ago, I developed an adaptive neural framework for predictive pattern modeling. It was stolen, along with my career." She turned to the screen. But code doesn't lie. A video began to play, the recovered log Ethan and she had found days earlier. On the screen, a younger Claire appeared, in a small lab, demonstrating her algorithm, explaining each function with enthusiasm. Behind her, the prototype interface bore the same identifier, now registered under NeuroSync's flagship product. The room went silent. Claire watched herself speak, her past self's confidence echoing like a ghost in the air. When the video ended, she turned back to the audience. "This isn't just about one project," she said. "It's about what happens when people in power believe they can rewrite history by erasing names. Lucas Graves took something he didn't create and sold it to the world as his own. But code remembers." Lucas rose suddenly, slamming his hand on the table. "This is absurd. That video could be fabricated. Anyone can—" A voice cut through his outrage, calm but firm. "It's authentic." Heads turned toward the side of the room, where Ryan Cole, the young engineer from WardTech, stood holding a printed verification log. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, evidence of sleepless nights. "Every digital signature in that video matches the original dataset archived on Stanford's cloud servers. I verified it myself. The metadata is untouched." Reporters erupted into whispers. Cameras flashed. Ethan's gaze was steady. "You wanted proof. Now you have it." At the back of the room, an unexpected figure stood quietly. Helen Ward, Ethan's mother. She hadn't meant to attend the meeting, but something had drawn her here. Dressed in soft gray with her hair pinned neatly, she watched the eBay chaos with calm eyes. When Claire looked her way, Helen raised her hands in gentle sign. "You speak with your heart. Keep talking." Claire nodded, feeling strength rise where fear used to live. She turned back to Lucas. "You erased my name," she said, her voice steady as steel. "Now I'm here to write it back myself." The audience broke into murmurs again. Lucas's composure cracked, his face twisted in anger, then disbelief. But before he could speak, security officers entered the room, followed by 2 federal investigators. One stepped forward, a stern woman in a dark pantsuit, Agent Laura Pierce, early 40s, with sharp hazel eyes and a tone that tolerated no argument. "Mr. Graves," she said, "you're under investigation for corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, and falsification of federal filings. You'll need to come with us." Lucas's voice was venomous. "You can't arrest me on hearsay." "Good thing this isn't hearsay," Agent Pierce replied coldly, holding up a warrant. "It's a subpoena, and a digital forensic report from Stanford's legal department. You might want to call your lawyer." As security escorted him out, flashes from the reporters' cameras followed. Lucas threw one last glance at Claire, hatred and fear mixing like oil and fire. When the doors closed behind him, the tension broke like a dam. People began murmuring again, some in shock, others in admiration. Claire exhaled shakily, her knees weak, but Ethan was already beside her. He steadied her hand, his voice low. "You did it." She looked at him, the man who had chosen truth over wealth, who had given her a platform when the world had buried her. "No," she said softly. "We did." Ethan stepped back to the podium. "Effective immediately," he said to the stunned audience. "The merger between WardTech and NeuroSync is terminated. WardTech will cooperate fully with the investigation." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. It wasn't just for Ethan's decision, but for the moment of justice everyone had witnessed. Meanwhile, outside the tower, Maya Patel was living a different battle. She sat in her old Honda across the street, her phone buzzing with an anonymous text, "Stop helping her or you'll regret it." The words made her stomach tighten, but she didn't hesitate. She quickly forwarded the data backup Ryan had given her to a secure cloud, then deleted all traces from her device. Moments later, a black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but sky. When she pulled out of the parking lot, it followed. Maya forced herself to keep calm, turning down side streets, weaving through traffic. At a red light, she glanced in the mirror. Still there. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. "Okay," she muttered to herself. "You picked the wrong girl to scare." She sped through the next turn, disappearing into the maze of streets. Back inside the tower, Ethan and Claire stood by the glass wall overlooking the skyline. The city glittered with rain-slicked light, serene, almost indifferent to the chaos that had unfolded below. Claire touched the window pane, her reflection faint against the night. "It's not over," she said quietly. "Lucas won't go down without dragging someone with him." Ethan's expression hardened. "Then we'll be ready." And somewhere below, unseen in the street's reflection, the black SUV passed again, circling like a shadow that refused to die. 6 months had passed since the day Lucas Graves was led out of Arden Tower in handcuffs. Seattle's winter had softened into spring, and for once the city's rain carried warmth instead of gloom. The sky was still its usual shade of silver, but the air felt lighter, as if something dark had finally lifted. The court's ruling had made headlines across every tech journal. NeuroSync CEO convicted of fraud and intellectual property theft. Beneath the article was another line that made Claire's heart stop the first time she saw it. All 17 patents to be legally restored to original author Claire Bennett. It was strange how quickly the world forgave, how easily admiration replaced silence. But Claire didn't bask in vindication. She had already buried the pain and left it behind. What mattered now wasn't revenge, but rebuilding. Inside a newly renovated office overlooking Lake Union, sunlight spilled across glass walls etched with the logo, Bennett and Ward Innovations. The letters gleamed faintly gold, their reflection rippling against the polished floor. This was their creation, a company founded not on profit, but on principle. Their mission statement hung proudly in the lobby. AI built on integrity. Claire stood by the large window, watching ferries glide through the lake. She wore a white blouse tucked into dark slacks, her hair tied in a loose knot, her posture now confident, assured. She still carried quietness like a companion, but it was no longer born of fear. It was focus. Behind her, Ethan Ward was finishing a phone call. He looked different now, less like a corporate executive and more like a man at ease with the world. His sharp suits had softened into dark shirts rolled at the sleeves, and a rare warmth had settled in his tone. He had fought his battles and found something better than power: peace. He ended the call and smiled. "Press is already gathering downstairs. You ready?" "As I'll ever be," Claire replied, turning to face him. "Your speech?" "Memorized, terrifyingly." Ethan chuckled. "That's the scientist in you, rehearsing every possible failure scenario." "Spoken like someone who's read too many risk assessment reports," she said, eyes twinkling. He tilted his head. "And you still didn't answer my question." She sighed, pretending to think. "No, but let's do it anyway." The launch event was held in the main atrium of the new office, a minimalist space of glass and light, decorated with subtle green plants and digital displays showing the company's projects. Transparent AI auditing tools, ethical coding platforms, assistive algorithms for accessibility. Reporters filled the room, the low hum of conversation echoing off the glass walls. Maya Patel, now head of public relations, moved between groups of journalists with effortless charm. Her once playful energy had matured into confident grace, though she still carried humor like a Iuja weapon. Dressed in a maroon dress and silver earrings, she seemed entirely in her element. Near the stage, Ryan Cole adjusted sound equipment, his once wild hair now neatly trimmed, though the shy, crooked smile remained. Their teamwork, both professional and personal, had become an open secret around the office. When Maya passed by, she brushed her fingers lightly across his shoulder. A small gesture, but one that said everything. Claire stood backstage, her pulse steady but strong. Ethan was beside her, adjusting the microphone on her lapel. "You'll do great," he said. "I'll try not to trip. If you do, I'll pretend it was part of the presentation." "Smooth as always, Mr. Ward." He smiled. "That's CEO Ward to you, Ms. Bennett." She looked up at him, eyes bright with amusement. "Actually, it's co-CEO." He laughed quietly. "Fair point." When her name was announced, applause filled the hall. Claire walked to the podium, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The lights were bright, but not blinding. She took a slow breath and began. "6 months ago," she said, her voice clear but gentle, "I thought my story had ended. I'd lost my career, my work, and, for a while, my faith in people. But life has a way of reminding you that endings and beginnings sometimes share the same doorway." She paused, letting the silence settle. The audience leaned in. "It took losing everything," she continued, "to understand what really matters, integrity and kindness. The world doesn't need faster algorithms or smarter machines as much as it needs people brave enough to build them with conscience." The crowd listened in rapt attention. In the front row, Ethan watched her with quiet pride, his expression softer than anyone had ever seen it. When the applause came, it rolled through the room like a wave. Afterward, as reporters crowded near the stage, Helen Ward appeared beside them, graceful as ever, dressed in a soft lavender shawl. The years hadn't dulled her elegance. If anything, they had given her the serenity of someone who had learned to live beyond sound. She caught Claire's eye and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Ward," Claire greeted, signing as she spoke. Helen replied in sign, her hands moving with tender precision. "You did beautifully." Every word reached further than sound ever could. Claire smiled back, touched. "You've been practicing." "You've been teaching well," Helen signed with a wink. Nearby, Maya joined them, gesturing toward the cameras. "You two should pose, the founders and the muse." "I can sell that headline," Ryan groaned. "Don't give the journalists ideas." Ethan appeared beside Claire. "They already have plenty," he said. "Half of them are calling this the redemption launch." Claire rolled her eyes. "Dramatic much?" Maya grinned. "Hey, people love a comeback story." As the laughter faded, Helen gently touched Claire's arm, signing slowly. "Home isn't a place. It's the people who stay." The words struck something deep. Claire reached out, squeezing her hand. "Then I guess I'm finally home." Later that evening, as the event wound down and the last guests drifted out, the city outside glowed with the reflections of soft rain. Claire stood on the rooftop terrace, the hum of conversation replaced by the whisper of drizzle on glass. The skyline shimmered, a blend of light and mist, Seattle's quiet poetry. Ethan joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "We survived," he said, handing her one. "Barely," she teased. "I think Maya threatened 3 journalists into behaving." "Effective leadership," he said with mock seriousness. They stood in silence for a while, watching the lights shimmer across the lake. Finally, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech. He simply opened it. Inside, a thin silver band, elegant and understated. Claire looked at him, caught between surprise and warmth. "It's not a proposal," Ethan said softly. "Not yet. It's a promise." She raised an eyebrow. "A promise?" He nodded. "Not rushing into forever, just walking there, one day at a time." For a long moment the city seemed to fade around them. Claire smiled, a real unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "Forever sounds good." They stood together, the rain softening into mist, the lights of Seattle reflecting in the glass tower below. The same tower where their story had begun, now reborn under new light. Behind them, through the open door, Helen watched quietly from afar, her hands folded together, a gentle smile on her face. Maya and Ryan laughed over something at the buffet, their silhouettes framed by soft golden light. For once there were no secrets, no ghosts, no fear, only peace. And as dawn broke over the horizon, the first rays of sunlight touched the glass walls of Bennett and Ward Innovations, scattering through the city like fragments of promise. The past had burned away. What remained was the beginning of everything new. Sometimes God does not give us miracles in thunder or lightning. He sends them quietly, through people who choose honesty when it costs them everything, through kindness that survives betrayal, and through love that grows where pain once lived. Claire's story reminds us that faith is not about waiting for signs from heaven, but about believing that truth and goodness still matter in a world that often forgets them. When we lose everything, maybe that is when God begins His work, not by giving back what we had, but by shaping us into who we were meant to become. Every heartbreak, every storm, every night of doubt can lead to a new dawn if we hold on to hope. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave a comment and write Amen to bless the journey of everyone who fights quietly for what is right. Subscribe to our channel to keep faith and love alive in every story we tell. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you that miracles still happen, often in the smallest, most human ways.